So, good morning, everybody. My name is Licinia Pereira. I'm the financial officer here at the CINEA Life Operational Financial Unit. And well, first of all, I wanted to say congratulations to you all. You've made it. So it's great that you've been selected and you're about or you've recently started your project. And I know there's a lot to think about, to prepare, to coordinate, but it's not all about technical issues. There's project management, and of course, you cannot forget about the financial part. Some things have changed since the live program 2014-2020, and you have to be aware of them. So because this has an impact on your action. So even if you might think that finance and contractual issues are not so interesting, I'm asking you to please give us your attention for the next hour, and also to please make sure that you are attending our specific financial meeting, which is scheduled for the 24th of October. If your financial manager, officer, or the person who is dealing with financial issues is not participating or hasn't registered yet, please make sure that this person is attending the meeting. We will be dealing specifically with staff costs. The way these are calculated and the way these are reported has changed. And I will be just making some brief references to that in our presentation today. So I'll be giving you some tips at the end and also some lessons learned, because we have already received some final reports and some additional pre-financing requests for the projects that have been selected and already ongoing since last year. So I'll be giving you that kind of information at the end of it. Okay, so if I can have the presentation. Thank you. So next slide, please. So some of you have already been posting on Slido and asking for a reference document. So here are the reference documents that you need. The first one is a general link to all the documents, legislation, work program, the call documents, grant agreements, guidance, templates, etc. This you will find in the portal. Then the next one is the model grant agreement for life. So basically your grant agreement, what you have signed, all the articles are there. And this particular next one, the live annotated grant agreement, of which there is a new version since April this year, this will be the equivalent of the Annex 10, if you kind of will, of the legacy live program. So here you will find an annotated grant agreement. So basically comments, advice, guidance, explanation on each specific type of cost category that you have in your grant agreement. It is not complete. It's a living document. So please make sure you always have this latest version, or when there's a next one that you have that one. And please read it carefully. This is really a strong recommendation from our side in case you haven't done that yet. Next one is rules on legal entity validation and financial capacity assessment. I mean, you have been through this already, but in case there's new beneficiaries, for example, a new coordinator, then, and it's a private organization, then the financial capacity assessment needs to be done. You can go to the portal and also make a self-assessment if you're interested in that. And then something new, how to complete your financial statement, and a reference to the financial more detailed meeting that we will have later on this month on the 24th of October. Next slide. So here, the model grant agreement, what are the main financial parts and aspects that you need to really know? So the data sheet, a summary, the Annex 1, so here you have the detailed budget table. This you have, you've done it on the gap revision exercise. Your estimated budget is the Annex 2. Very important as well, if you have SME owners without a salary and volunteers in your grant, this is the information where you can get the unit costs and contributions. And then Annex 5 on certain specific rules for your project. Next slide. So here is just a summary of the data sheet. What is in there? Here it's really a summary of your action, when it starts, when it ends, who is participating, what is the grant amount, your funding, your co-funding rate, so the percentage of your funding, what are the budget categories which are eligible, in terms of reporting, payment, pre-financing, guarantee if applicable, if you need to submit a certificate on financial statements. So normally it's if you are requesting EU contribution equal or higher than 500,000. What happens if there are recovery orders? What happens if there's non-compliance? And as we just heard, also some specific rules on logos or also on record keeping. Next slide. So here, the type of participants that you have in your grant agreement. So very, very important, of course, the coordinator. The coordinator is our contact point. The coordinator is the one that signs the grant agreement. And of course, there's a lot of responsibilities for the coordinator. And here again, we would really strongly emphasize on the financial aspect. If possible, if the coordinator could also provide some guidance on reporting, of course, also checking what are the main rules, etc. So the coordinator is really a very important part in the action, of course. Then the beneficiaries also participating in the action, also signing. Affiliated entities, they have similar rights and obligations to the beneficiaries. However, they do not sign the grant agreement. But of course, the beneficiary to whom they are linked, either legally or capital terms, is responsible for them. Associated partners, this is something new in the new program. They will be participating in the action because they have something to bring. They're important, or they want to bring some kind of expertise, but they do not charge any costs. And they do not claim any type of contribution. They do also not sign the grant agreement. Then you have other actors, other types of actors in your action. If you have subcontracting, well, then you will have subcontractors. They will be providing you with a service for which you will be paying. You might also have in-kind contributions. However, these are not taken into consideration in the budget. So the cost or the income is not eligible. And you might also have, if your call has allowed this, third parties who will be receiving financial support, but only if foreseen in the call in your grant agreement. Next slide, please. So here is just a table. I'm not going to go into this. This is more for your reference, and you will see that this is also coming from the annotated grant agreement. This is just a summary of who works in what can be eligible, where are they indicated, and what are the conditions for their participation. Next slide, please. So here, very important article, which you will find also in the model grant agreement and also in the annotated grant agreement. You will find a lot of explanations on what does this mean? What does it mean incurred by the beneficiary or its affiliated entities? It means that a certain cost has really happened. It is in the accounting records. It has been paid, so it's a real cost, and it has to be incurred either by the beneficiary or affiliated entities which are in the grant agreement. If they're not in the grant agreement, well, then it's considered not incurred by this action. Incurred during the duration of the project. Here, there are some exceptions, for example, the final reporting, the audit report, because of course they will happen after the project has ended, but there's always a bit of confusion incurred during the duration. It is not corrected with payment. Of course, you need to pay for the costs. However, a cost is considered incurred when, for example, a certain work is done, when a certain service is delivered, or when a certain consumable is brought to your premises, when it's delivered to you. it has to be foreseen. So it has to be in one of the budget categories in your grant agreement, either in Annex 2 or Annex 1 detailed budget. It needs to be connected to the action and necessary for its implementation, identifiable and verifiable. So what I said before, so recorded in the accounts of the beneficiary, comply with all national laws on taxes, labor, social security, and not to be neglected, reasonable, justified, and complied with the sound financial management. So if we find that a cost is accessible, not justified, we reserve the right to reject it. Next slide, please. So here also for unit costs and flat rate, in case you have this in your action. So it has to be declared in the correct budget category related to the period of the action. Sometimes you need, for accruals, you need to calculate the pro rata. So the costs to which the flat rate is applied, of course, they need to be eligible. This is particularly for the indirect costs of 7%. The unit costs, they have to be necessary for the implementation. And in particular, if you have volunteers or SME owners without a salary, the way that the number of the units are calculated, this needs to be identifiable and verifiable, and in particular supported by records and documentations. And here, please see Annex 2A for further guidance. Next slide, please. So here's just an example of how a budget looks like. So here on the left, you have the personal costs, all the different types of personal costs you might have, then subcontracting, purchase of costs, travel, subsistence, equipment, other goods, works and services, other categories, if foreseen in your call, financial support, third parties, land purchased, and then of course, indirect costs. And then how we calculate the maximum EU contribution that you can receive in your grant. Next slide, please. So here what we have just seen, the direct costs. So direct costs are the costs that are directly related to your action, and they are necessary. Indirect costs are typically those that you calculate by applying a percentage. And here you should not include these in the direct costs. Here are the types of direct costs that you can find in your grant, and we will be going through each one of them, in particular with the personal costs. Next slide, please. So I will start with the personal costs, and these are the category A1, employees or equivalent. This is the typical staff costs that you will have, the most common, and they are calculated by what? Of course, the salaries, social security contributions, taxes, and any other costs which are linked to your remuneration if they are foreseen in national law, employment contract, and also your usual practice. And here already a hint of the information that you will be getting in our meeting of the 24th of October. Here is a big change on the calculation of the staff costs and also how you report them. So the way they are calculated is this. This is coming from the annotated grant agreement, in case you haven't seen it before. So the personal costs are calculated for each person for the reporting period. So the recommendation that it's by reporting period and no longer by years. Okay, you can claim a maximum of 215 day equivalents, and the way they are calculated is indicated there, divided by 12, multiplied by the number of months within your reporting period, and then multiplied by the working factor, either 1 for full-time or 0.5 for 50%, and then multiplied by the daily rate. Here, the daily rate calculation has also changed. How is it done? You take the actual personal costs during the months within that reporting period, and you divide by what we have just calculated, the day equivalents. So sorry to go so detailed here, but we really want to make sure that you are aware. This has changed and you really need to take this into consideration. Next slide, please. Here is the next two categories that we have of personal costs. So either natural persons, and these will be persons who work under a direct contract or an employment contract, and seconded persons. Seconded persons, they will be working for you. They are coming from a third party, but you will be paying them. So what are the conditions? They work under similar conditions to those of your employees. So the way the work is organized, the tasks performed, and also the premises. For example, teleworking. If your employees cannot telework, seconded persons can also not telework. If they are teleworking 2 days a week, well, then seconded persons can telework also 2 days a week, not more nor less. So they really need to be similar. The result of this work needs to belong to the beneficiary unless it has been agreed otherwise with you. And it's calculated on the basis of the actual contract or secondment rate. And of course, it cannot be significantly different than to the payment you are providing to your employees. Next slide, please. So here, the next two categories, A4, A5. So SME owners or natural persons, sole traders, and SME owners not receiving a salary. Here is just how it's calculated. So it's a formula indicated there, and then you need to multiply by the country-specific correction. This information you will have in A2. So this is this correction coefficient. And then for volunteers, so volunteers are people that work for free in your organization. So there's no payment. You're not going to transfer them anything. They're not going to be paid. It's not compulsory. And there are some conditions for their participation if this is allowed in your call text, of course. So maximum 50% of the total project costs and contributions. Maximum EU contribution cannot be higher than the total eligible costs without volunteers. Here, I suggest you take an Excel and you do some formulas, because this phrase is very difficult to get a grip on. So just do that. In any case, for your grant, this has been verified, so it should be okay. And at reporting stage, you cannot exceed the maximum amount for volunteers for each beneficiary, which was already set out in your Annex 2 upon the grant agreement signature. Next slide, please. So here we have left the personal costs. We are entering now another type of cost, which is subcontracting. So if you consider that there are some expertise that you do not have, or that you want to hire another company or an expert to do this actions, this is of course allowed. There are certain conditions. They need to comply with the conditions that I have just mentioned some slides ago. They need to comply with the beneficiary's usual purchasing practices. So you need to ensure best value for money, if appropriate, the lowest price, and no conflict of interests. It covers normally what we consider action tasks. It cannot include for the coordinator the subcontracting of the project management of this action. It can only cover a limited part of the action unless this has been properly justified. So normally we take the reference of 30%. And if you are a contracting authority, then this means that you also need to comply with EU directives, national law on public procurement. Next slide, please. Another category of costs, purchase costs, travel and subsistence. These you need to report in line with your usual practices. And then another type, equipment. Here you can have two options. Either your call indicates that only the depreciation of equipment is foreseen, which is the case of the set calls, or you have the other option, which is a full cost, and you can list the equipment that you're going to depreciate. So two options possible. If we go to the depreciation of costs, so either in the set calls or that you need to list the equipment, SAP, SIP, or SNAPs actions. What are the conditions for them to be considered eligible? They actually need to be incurred, written off in accordance with international accounting standards and your usual accounting practices. It can only be the portion of the cost that corresponds to the actual use rate in the action and in the reporting period. And of course, if the cost for renting or leasing is what you prefer instead of purchasing and then depreciating the equipment, they cannot exceed the depreciation costs of similar equipment. Next slide, please. So here is then what you can have in the standard action projects, strategic nature projects or strategic integrated projects, which is the full cost. So here you need to check the Annex 5 for the durability. So they need to be purchased or developed specifically for your action, and you need to commit to use and maintain them after the end of the action for activities pursuing the action's objectives for at least 5 years or until the end of its economic lifespan. Of course, the cost needs to be recorded in your accounting system in the fixed asset account in compliance, again, with international accounting standards and your own usual accounting practices. Next slide, please. Other goods, works and services. So again, these are costs that need to be incurred. So please remember all the criteria that we seen some slides ago. What does it include? Consumables, supplies, promotion, dissemination, protection of results, translations, publication, the certification on financial statements and financial guarantees if these are required by the agreement. Here there is sometimes some confusion on gray areas between subcontracting and this area. So subcontracting is really for action tasks, so main tasks. And if you're really delegating, if you will, if you're really subcontracting for a whole task, then it's subcontracting. Otherwise, you're purchasing a service or good or works, and you should declare it here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So another type of cost, financial support to third parties. So not all the calls will allow this. For example, for the said call, this is not foreseen, not allowed, but for other calls there is. So please check your grant agreement. So what is it? It's a form of grants, prizes, or similar forms of support. They are eligible if so in line with the call conditions. So there is a maximum for action, so at the global level or per third party. They need to fulfill the general eligibility conditions calculated on the basis of costs which were actually incurred, and the conditions need to be already described in Annex 1 of your grant agreement. So you really need to ensure that the objective and that there is a transparent selection procedure already described in Annex 1. Next slide, please. So some of the conditions for grants, the amount per third party, and what is the criteria that you will be using to calculate this amount, the different types of activities that can qualify for this, and the persons or categories of persons that can be supported, and of course, criteria and procedures for providing this financial support. If it's a prize, then what are the eligibility and award criteria? What is the amount of the prize and what are the payment arrangements? This has already been included in your Annex 1, and this is what you need to follow in order for these costs to be considered eligible. Next slide, please. So land purchase, this is also another type of cost category that you might have. It is also foreseen, so eligible if foreseen in the call text. It's from private entities. It includes the long term of lease of land or one-off compensation for land use rights. And it's eligible, well, if it's in the core conditions, fulfills again the general eligibility conditions we've seen, based on costs actually incurred, and they need to be compliant with land purchase criteria. Next slide, please. So here we have put some slides. They are in gray, so I will not go into details, but we wanted you to have this information. However, in order to ensure that we have enough time for your questions, we won't go in through them. So next slide, please. And again, next slide, please. So indirect costs, what are they? They are foreseen in the calls. Normally it's a 7% rate. The calculation should be automated and therefore already pre-filled in the IT system. However, they can be changed. For example, if you have an operating grant and you don't have a separation in the accounting system that you can demonstrate that you are not covering any costs which are already covered in the action grant, then you can reduce the 7% rate. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot about what are the eligible costs, but we also need to know what is not eligible. So here is some examples. Again, you can see in-kind contributions, deductible or refundable VAT, costs incurred after or before the start of the action, or if it's suspended, some dividends, etc. Next slide, please. Also, for example, in order to avoid double funding, of course, you cannot claim a cost twice. So if you are receiving funding for some cost from the LIFE program, you cannot receive for the same cost another funding. That's why it is very important in your accounting that you don't report the costs through who is funding, but who is the action? What action is covering that cost? So, for example, you should put a cost in your accounting according to the life action and not according to who is funding, in case you have another co-financer. What is also not eligible, costs or contributions for staff of a national administration for activities which are already part of this administration, normal activities. Costs and contributions, especially for travel and subsistence for us, staff or representatives of EU institutions, bodies, or agencies, and of course, costs which are specifically indicating as not eligible in a call. Next slide, please. So here, this has already been covered by the presentation from Julia and the colleagues. So basically, please remember to comply with the EU funding visibility included in Annex 5. Next slide, please. So also general information and obligations. Please provide us always information when we are requesting for verification of the eligibility of the costs, your implementation and compliance with any obligations in the grant agreement. If your organization has changed name, address, legal representative, etc., legal status as well, please keep the participant register data updated. And please always inform us of events and circumstances which impact the action. They might need an amendment. So tomorrow we will be seeing the amendments, and this is something that you need to keep in mind. If something happens, please inform us. Next slide, please. Record keeping, so very important. I've seen already some requests to have some Excel sheets and some registration. So here is the article that you need to see both in your grant agreement and also in the annotated grant agreement. Please, there's a lot of information there. Here is just a quick summary of what you will find there. So for actual costs, you need to keep the records supporting documents that prove that a cost has been incurred. So this can be contracts, subcontracts, invoices, So please keep them. For us, it is very important that we are able to directly reconciliate the amounts that you have recorded in your accounts with the amounts that you have declared in your reporting. So for the flat rate, of course, you need to keep the records to prove the eligibility of the costs on the contribution of the flat rate level. Unit costs also particularly on the proof of the number of units that you will claim. For example, if an SME owner is participating one day to one of the conferences, then keep records of their participation. It's a proof that you have that this person has provided 1 unit of work for your action. For personal costs, again, there are changes, and there are basically two methods now of making the registration. Either you will take the template that you will find in the funding portal, which is a monthly registration. Again, we will be going into more details in our presentation on the 24th of October. And so you can take this template and do a monthly registration, or you can keep the method that you have if you prefer. If it's a reliable also time recording system in place, also providing the same information that you would find in the monthly registration template. Of course, it's very important that the employee and the supervisor date and sign preferably every month at least this registration, unless you have another reliable and verifiable time recording system. So these documents, of course, need to be made available in context of checks, reviews, audits, investigations, etc. Next slide, please. So the reporting. So you have basically two types of reporting, and this will be coming up soon. So continuous reporting, this is the progress of the action, and this is done in the portal. This is more on the technical side, and my colleague Nadia will be talking about this tomorrow. Then you have the periodic reporting, which is connected to the payment claims. So you need to provide reports according to the schedule which is indicated in the data sheet. So normally within 60 days after the end of the reporting period, please check. Anyway, you will be notified by the system when this comes up. And the technical part includes an overview of the action implementation, and it must be using the template available in the portal. For us on the technical side, so if you have an additional pre-financing report coming up, you will need to include a statement of how much you have used of the previous pre-financing payment. So you will introduce this amount in the system. And please, 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 it is not the costs which are incurred that you need to indicate. It is the corresponding EU funding. So you take the costs that you have incurred, you multiply by the co-funding rate, I don't know, 60%, 95% in the case of SET, and that you get the amount consumed, and this is the amount that you need to indicate in the system. Next slide, please. So here in case of final payments, it's a little bit more complex in comparison with the additional pre-financing where there aren't really any financial reports. Here upon the final payments or interim payments for the strategic actions, you need to provide financial statements to indicate at individual and consolidated level for all the beneficiaries and the affiliated entities as well. They need to include the costs or any revenues of the actions. You will find the template in the portal, and you will be requested to fill in the use of resources. So compared to the past, not all the costs will be reported. You will need to provide details for major costs, particularly for the purchase costs category. You will need to indicate the amounts or the costs that go 15% higher than the claimed personal costs. Don't worry, this is indicated in the template, so you don't need to memorize this straight away, but just retain 15% higher than the personal costs, and you will start with the most expensive costs coming down to cover this 15% threshold. So don't worry, we will be covering this later on the 24th of October meeting. Then you will need to provide the certificate on the financial statements if you are requesting equal or higher than 500,000 per beneficiary. So again, this is not costs, this is EU contribution. And the financial statements are signed in the system. Next slide, please. Just a quick information on the currency reporting. So if your accountancy is in euro, if you incur any costs in a currency which is not the euro, please just use your usual accounting practices. If, on the other hand, your accountancy is not in euro, then please use this link to make your conversions. And normally the language of reporting is the language of the grant agreement, which is English. And of course, the translation costs for any reports are eligible. Next slide, please. So here is just a print screen of what the model of the financial statement will look like. You will see that the structure is exactly the same as the Annex 2. So starting with personal costs, subcontracting, purchase of costs, and other cost categories. Next slide, please. And here is just a picture of what the report of use of resources looks like. And here at the bottom part, purchase costs, you will see the indication start with the most expensive down to the 15% threshold. So there you have the information that you need to be able to fill this in correctly. Next slide, please. So payments will be done in euro in the bank account that you have indicated in the grant agreement. Please remember, as a coordinator, that you need to distribute both the pre-financing and the payments without any unjustified delay. What are the payment arrangements normally foreseen? Well, first you get a first pre-financing, which is normally at 30%. Then you get a further pre-financing at 50%, or there is a split. And then at the end, you get the rest around 20% maximum normally. So the amount due for the pre-financing and further pre-financings, we have already indicated to you that you need to indicate the amount that you have consumed of the previous pre-financing. And in the case that is less than 70%, then we will reduce the amount which is foreseen in your grant agreement. So this we will also explain later on in the 24th of October meeting. The amount to do for the final pre-financings, of course, we take the costs that have been incurred, we multiply by the co-funding rate, minus any profit, and of course we deduct the pre-financings already paid. Please note that there might be some ex post audits which might reduce, or there might also be some additional pre-financings. Next slide, please. So here we come to some guidance. Really from the beginning, please make sure that you understand which costs are eligible. Check your grant agreement, the data sheet, and check what is allowed, what is not allowed. Make sure that in your accountancy, you are allocating the costs for this action, not according to who is funding the cost. This is very important. You need to use adequate tools and procedures to track and keep appropriate level of recording for all the costs. And here, just another summary of the personal costs. So either using method A or method B. Follow your usual accounting practices and rules, particularly for travel, subsistence, depreciation. Please make sure that you are aware of your procurement procedures and your obligations, including the LIFE logo, of course, and if applicable, enter the data in the land purchase database. Next slide, please. In terms of guidance and also on lessons learned, here we have developed a financial reporting checklist for beneficiaries. This is on our website on the live program section, reporting contract and financial aspects, to be more exact. So this is a file where you will get information on each cost and where you can get what articles are corresponding to that. So that's a very good start on giving you some guidance. And then also, like I said in the beginning, we have already received some final payment claims and also some additional pre-financing requests. And we have noticed that a lot of projects have not yet grasped that we have a different way of calculating and reporting personal costs. So please go to the annotated grant agreement and pay attention to these aspects that are indicated here. So ensure a correct method to calculate the daily rate and the number of daily rates equivalents that you can declare, maximum 215 per year. The working time factor needs to be taken into consideration. Sick and parental leave cannot be included in the 215 days. So this is also something new. We have developed a calculation sheet. I've seen that some people already in the slide have been asking for this. For the moment, we have only for A1 employees, but we have already enlarged and we are just finalizing the table. Hopefully for the end of the month, this will be ready and we will be making it available to you. And this will enable you to really check, am I calculating this correctly or not? Please make sure that your staff is allocated or there's a direct link to the action in your accounting system. You have a proper registration system for the personnel that it's stated and signed per month by the person, the employee, and also the supervisor. And this is applicable to all those working in the action, including those that are working full-time. And also a quick word on the accruals. So if you have a lump sum, for example, a compensation because somebody will stop working in your organization, of course, you can only calculate this pro rata according to the reporting period that you are declaring. So again, we will go into more details, but please already make some time to go and read about this so that you get it right. Next slide, please. So again, this is in gray. This is just a summary of other articles that are also important and a quick summary for you for your convenience so that you read at your ease. For the sake of time, I will not go through them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So these are just on terminations, etc. And yeah, this is just how to get in touch with us. And thank you.